In early 2025, the United States and India launched the Compact Initiative, a framework for military partnership and accelerated commerce. This was paired with Mission 500, a massive trade goal aiming to more than double bilateral trade to $500 billion by 2030. On paper, this is a strategic architecture built for one specific purpose: to anchor the Indo-Pacific and counter China's expanding global weight. But beneath the surface, the cooperation is fracturing. Within India, politicians and media outlets have begun a sharp campaign against what they describe as Western interference in their sovereign decisions. Indian Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar captured this defiance on the world stage, stating bluntly that Europe's problems are not the world's problems. This friction turned into an economic collision in 2025. The U.S. slapped a 50% tariff on Indian goods, specifically targeting New Delhi for its continued purchases of discounted Russian oil. While the two nations are aligning against Beijing, India's fierce independence makes it unclear if Washington is building its strongest partner or its next great challenger. This tension isn't new. For much of the Cold War, the U.S. and India were known as the estranged democracies. In Washington, Indian neutrality wasn't seen as a legitimate choice. It was viewed as an immoral refusal to take a side in the global fight against communism. The relationship reached a breaking point in 1971. During a war between India and Pakistan, the U.S. deployed the nuclear aircraft carrier USS Enterprise to the Bay of Bengal as an explicit threat to New Delhi. A genuine thaw didn't arrive until 2006, when President George W. Bush signed the Civilian Nuclear Agreement, ending decades of Indian nuclear isolation. This launched an era of dehyphenation, a strategy where the U.S. finally stopped linking its India policy to its relationship with Pakistan, treating New Delhi as a standalone power. But those decades of hostility left a lasting mark. India emerged from that era determined to never accept the role of a junior partner to the United States. That determination is codified in the doctrine of strategic autonomy, the idea that India's policy is dictated by its physical geography, not ideological blocks. The United States operates with a global focus, prioritizing the defense of the Pacific Ocean, the South China Sea, and Taiwan. India's threats are much closer to home. New Delhi is hyper-focused on its immediate land borders in the Himalayas and the Arabian Sea, as well as its maritime backyard in the Indian Ocean. When you map these priorities together, the gap becomes visible. Both nations are worried about China, but they are preparing for battles in entirely different theaters. This geographic mismatch creates a persistent political friction. They share a rival, but they don't necessarily share a mission. Strategic autonomy effectively forces India to play multiple sides at once to secure its own defense and energy infrastructure. On one side, India is integrating with the West, buying advanced American tech like the MQ-9B Reaper drones and opening its doors to U.S. data center giants. Simultaneously, it remains tied to Moscow. Russia still provides the bulk of India's cheap crude oil and critical air defense systems, like the S-400. By 2025, Washington's patience wore thin. To force India away from Russia, the U.S. weaponized its trade policy, spiking tariffs to 50%. The two sides eventually reached an interim deal in 2026, dropping the rate to 18%. But the damage to the relationship's trust was already done. Through that crisis, New Delhi made its position clear. It was willing to absorb massive economic damage to protect its right to choose its own partners. If India continues to resist a formal U.S. alliance, it raises a difficult question. Is Washington accidentally fueling a future competitor? U.S. officials are beginning to voice that concern. Diplomat Christopher Landau noted that the U.S. will not repeat the mistake of empowering a nation the way it did with China 2 decades ago. The relationship is now evolving into a state of comparative realism, a transaction framework where both sides view the other as necessary, but only for specific overlapping interests. India's goal is not to be a Western ally, but to emerge as a third pole in a multipolar world, acting as the undisputed leader of the global South. This partnership will be self-interested and often antagonistic. But as long as the pressure of China competition remains, the two nations are locked into a relationship that neither can afford to walk away from.